On Friday, February 7th, Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Assembly of First Nations National Chief Shawn Atleo made a joint announcement regarding the First Nations Education Act. The legislation, now re-spun as the First Nations Control of First Nations Education Act, made certain additions to the proposed law, such as the promise of additional dollars, but did not address Kahnawà's long-standing concerns. Once the news sank in, Chief and Council met first thing Monday morning to analyze the new developments, and that analysis did not change the MCK's stance against the controversial law.
Well, I think first we need to clarify that we weren't part of the announcement last Friday by Assembly of First Nations Chief Atleo as well as the Prime Minister. We're surprised and shocked to some degree. We had some prior information on Thursday, but we weren't informed as to negotiations that were ongoing or what kind of deal had been made. So our position remains the same. We're still against the First Nation Education Act, even with its new title, because we don't know what the contents are. There's a phantom of a promise in terms of funding, and it'll only happen after the next federal election, which doesn't mean anything to any educators or children or us as the Mohawk Council today. I'm sure the working group, which we'll be meeting with on Thursday, share the same sentiments that we're not impressed overall.
Well, from what I saw, it was obviously a spin-off from Indian Control of Indian Education, which we all know that there were certain principles, I guess, that come from that aren't really being honored in the announcement that was made on Friday. But more importantly, I did hear from the Prime Minister's comments that his interpretation of First Nations control means local control, and I'm using his words here, local control of education the same way that other Canadians afford. The same way that other Canadians enjoy. And so the way that I interpret that is that he sees First Nations taking on a more administrative role as opposed to jurisdictional control.
Again, not impressed. I mean, it's easy to take a pen to paper and change the title, but without having any kind of insight into what the negotiations, discussions were, and not being able to see any type of draft legislation, although there are promises being made and the words on paper from Canada and Chief Atleo are very good, there's no substance to it yet. They're talking about co-drafting these regulations, which a lot of the detail will be in. As we always say, devil's in the details. It just doesn't make you feel trustworthy of the process.
I'm not really seeing anything positive coming out of the statement, except for the fact that there seems to be some understanding that the systems are underfunded at this point. They're chronically underfunded. However, fixing it with an announcement of funds and not meeting the other requirements that we really need to see met in communities is not going to fix the problem with the education systems.
There is a Quebec Chiefs Assembly next week, which I'll be attending, at education. We're going to ensure is part of the discussion, although it's not on the formal agenda, and I don't know why. I'll be meeting or speaking at least with Ghislain Picard before then to ensure that our position is heard loud and clear again. I'm sure Chief Gilbert Whiteduck from Kitigan-Zibi will be there too, so our position hasn't changed. We're going to remain staunchly opposed to this thing. It's getting tougher and tougher, especially with the AFN on side now, apparently, from Friday's announcement.
There's no real commitment for pre-kindergarten or kindergarten, and there's no real commitment for post-secondary. There's not a full understanding of what would happen to tuition, covering tuition to go to either private school or public school outside of the community. And Friday's announcement doesn't address any of those issues.
Well, we've taken some actions. We've given direction to First Nation Education Council back in early December. More than 2 months have gone by and they've done nothing. So we're going to do some of the work that we asked them to do, directed them to do by Assembly of First Nation Chiefs. We're going to do some internal work here. We have a legal opinion that was done that we've shared with our working group, the community working group that we'll be meeting with on Thursday. As I said, I'll be meeting with Ghislain and the other chiefs of Quebec next week in Montreal. So there are some actions that can be taken, but again, given that the AFN has agreed to this, it takes the wind out of a lot of people's sails. So it's not looking that great.